My presentation is going to deal briefly with four areas that are pertinent to how we view Africa-China relations in the 21st century. I'd like to start off talking about the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC. I want to discuss some aspects of the recent visit by the United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to 3 African states. Also, the whole concept of democracy, the Western concept, the Chinese concept, and also how the concept of international solidarity relates to Africa-China relations. A ministerial summit, in fact, the 8th ministerial summit of the Forum on China and Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, was held just several weeks ago in Dakar, Senegal, in West Africa. It was designed to reinforce the continuing bonds between Beijing and the 55-member African Union. 53 states on the continent have relations with China. Outside of Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland, and of course the SADR, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, which is not a sovereign state, although it is recognized by the African Union and the United Nations. FOCAC was formed in 2000 during an important period, which was marked by several years of substantial economic growth on the continent of Africa and in the People's Republic of China. Concurrently, over the same last 2 decades, the United States, Britain, the European Union, and their allies globally have been embroiled in numerous imperialist interventions which have resulted in destabilizations, military interventions, proxy wars, and the expansion of the presence of the Pentagon and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization forces throughout Africa, Asia, and Latin America. These imperialist endeavors aimed at maintaining the political and economic domination of the world's population has created enormous difficulties for peoples globally, including the working class and the nationally oppressed and the overall impoverished living in the Western capitalist countries as well. Successive administrations in the United States and Britain have turned away, even rhetorically, from any notion of multilateralism, a reliance on the United Nations to resolve tensions and conflicts as well. They have created the conditions for widespread displacement internationally. The migration crisis in North Africa, the Mediterranean, which is extended into Southern, Central, and Western Europe, is a direct result of a series of wars and their aftermaths in countries such as Libya, Mali, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Haiti, to name the most well-known and the most devastating. The 21st century has witnessed US-instigated regime change in numerous states, while the socialist states, such as the People's Republic of China, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, etc., have not embarked upon any destabilization efforts, let alone invasions into other sovereign states. Due to the socialist economic planning and their advancement of the notions of international cooperation and peace among states with varying social systems, there has been tremendous progress in the areas of international solidarity. Another example is the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa grouping, BRICS. It is a manifestation of the role of Beijing, Moscow, and Pretoria, along with other states which have had which has varied in regard to their political orientation in recent years. These new alliances are perceived as a threat to the role of the United States, Britain, and the European Union, since they are not participant members and cannot directly impact the agendas and goals established by FOCAC and BRICS. With specific reference to the structures and objectives of FOCAC, the website of FOCAC says the following: The FOCAC follow-up mechanisms are built at 3 levels. The ministerial conference is held every 3 years. The senior officials follow-up meetings and the senior officials preparatory meetings for the ministerial conference are held respectively in the year and a few days before the ministerial conference is held. And the consultations between the African Diplomatic Corps in China and the Secretariat of the Chinese Follow-up Committee are held at least twice a year. The ministerial conference and the senior officials meeting are held alternatively in China and an African country, with China and the African host being co-chairs presiding over the meetings and taking the lead in implementing the outcomes of the meetings. The ministerial conference is attended by foreign ministers and ministers in charge of international cooperation, and the senior officials meeting by director general levels and officials of the competent departments of China, as well as African countries. At a recent 8th ministerial meeting of FOCAC in Senegal, a myriad of issues were discussed, including trade, investment, climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, along with the distribution and manufacturing of vaccines. The gathering in Senegal coincided with the publication of a white paper by the Chinese government on China-Africa cooperation. Now I want to move up to discuss the State Department, which deployed Antony Blinken in a failed attempt to weaken the FOCAC conference. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited 3 African states during November. It was done in many regards to attempt to counteract the impact of FOCAC. Blinken traveled to Kenya in East Africa, Senegal and West Africa, the location of the FOCAC conference, and the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which is the most populous state on the African continent. Objectively, no serious observer could argue that the foreign policy of the current President Joe Biden differs fundamentally from his predecessor, Donald J. Trump, in reference to the African Union member states. This lack of even a slight shift in policy towards Africa is reflected in the current conflict in the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, where Washington is backing a rebel group, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which previously was the leading force in the country's government prior to 2018. So of course, coinciding with the US Chief Envoy's trip to Africa, the talking points claiming Chinese debt traps, which have been touched on earlier, surfaced in the corporate media. Both Chinese and African officials dismiss such characterizations of the relations between the 2 geopolitical regions. I'd also like to touch on the concept of democracy, the US versus China. There was also a white paper issued in China explaining the concepts of democratic governance embodied within the program of the Communist Party, distinguishing its definition from what prevails in the United States. The US promotes itself as the citadel of world democracy, placing human rights as a cornerstone of its foreign policy. This white paper entitled China, Democracy That Works, which suggests that the Western forms of democracy have extreme deficiencies. We could look at the worsening economic conditions in the United States. This has served to inflame already existing social contradictions within the society. The country, the United States, was founded on the seizure of lands of the indigenous people. They were forcefully removed. There was mass extermination of the indigenous people in the United States as well. Even today, the indigenous people are largely relegated to reservations where many have been subjected to dangerous intrusions into their territories by multinational energy corporations that poison the soil and the water resources. As far as the descendants of African people are concerned, even though the Civil War ended 156 years ago, after nearly 2.5 centuries of enslavement under Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands within North America, there is widespread state-sponsored racism across the country where people are often impeded harassed, arrested, prosecuted, falsely imprisoned, and even killed by law enforcement personnel. To conclude, I just wanted to mention that China and Africa have similarities in their historical development, being post-colonial geopolitical regions seeking to reaffirm their places within an international community of nations and peoples. China, under socialist construction, has moved within a reachable distance to surpass the United States in economic status. The main differences is that the US built its wealth on the expropriation of indigenous land and the enslavement of Africans. During the mid-19th century, Mexico had huge swaths of this territory stolen by Washington under the guise of manifest destiny. In this period, the people of Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean are being blocked, incarcerated in federal detention facilities, and deported from the United States on a routine basis. People in North America must not be misled into taking a hostile position towards China and the burgeoning conflict between Washington and Beijing. The role of FOCAC and other structures guiding China-Africa cooperation should be studied as a model for greater international solidarity among working and oppressed people across the globe. Thank you so much once again for the invitation to participate in this webinar.